In November 1943, more American servicemen died in a single hour at sea than in almost any other naval disaster in US history. More than the Lusitania, close to the Titanic, and chances are you have never heard their names, because for over 2 decades, the US government made sure you never would. When people think of famous disasters at sea during World War II, they think of Pearl Harbor, or maybe a famous submarine wolfpack sinking a convoy. A slow, grinding, torpedo-by-torpedo kind of war. But the deadliest single loss of American troops at sea in that entire war wasn't caused by a torpedo or a bomb dropped by hand. It was caused by one of the very first guided missiles ever used in the history of warfare. A weapon so new, so terrifying, that the US Navy decided the public could never be allowed to know it existed. So they buried the story along with the men who died. This is the story of the USAT Rohna, the deadliest day in the history of American troop transport, and the cover-up that kept it out of the history books for a generation. In November 1943, a British troopship called the HMT Rohna was part of a large Allied convoy, designated KMF-26, moving through the Mediterranean off the coast of Algeria. On board were roughly 2,000 American servicemen, mostly from the US Army Air Forces, headed toward India to support operations against Japan. It was meant to be a routine transfer, just one leg of a very long journey. The convoy itself was massive. Dozens of ships, escorted by destroyers, carrying tens of thousands of Allied troops across a stretch of sea. German aircraft had been quietly watching for days. But German reconnaissance had already spotted the convoy, and Germany was about to test something no one on that ship could have imagined. On the afternoon of November 26th, a formation of German Henschel bombers appeared over the convoy. But instead of dropping bombs the old-fashioned way, one of them launched something new, a Henschel Hs 293, a radio-guided glide bomb. The pilot didn't just drop it and hope. He steered it in real time, using a small joystick, watching a flare on its tail as it curved through the sky toward its target. The Hs 293 could be steered in real time by radio signal, while its own rocket booster carried it toward the target. A rocket-boosted, radio-guided bomb. Essentially a prototype cruise missile, 15 years before the term cruise missile even existed. It was one of the first times in military history that a precision-guided missile was used to sink a ship, decades before guided missile was even a phrase most people understood. And when it hit, what happened next was even worse than the impact itself. The missile struck the engine room and the troop compartments. Fires spread almost instantly through fuel that had leaked across the deck and the surrounding water. Lifeboats failed. Some davits had rusted in place and couldn't be lowered. Men jumped into a sea that was, in places, literally on fire. Nearby Allied ships rushed in to rescue survivors in the dark, pulling men from burning water for hours. But by the time it was over, 1,015 US servicemen were dead, the single largest loss of American troops at sea from enemy action in the European theatre of the entire war. Alongside them, 134 British and Indian crew members of the Rohna itself also lost their lives. In total, more people died on the Rohna that afternoon than on the Lusitania, the ship whose sinking is credited with helping pull the United States into the First World War. You'd expect a disaster this size to be front-page news. It wasn't. And that's the part almost nobody knows.
The US military classified details of the attack secret. Survivors weren't just asked to stay quiet, they were formally warned that speaking about what really happened could mean a court-martial. Families of the dead were often given only vague explanations, and the specific cause, a guided missile, was kept out of public reporting entirely. Officially, the reasoning was military security, revealing that Germany had precision-guided weapons capable of this kind of accuracy could have caused panic or tipped off the Allies' own weapons research. The result? For close to 3 decades, one of the deadliest days in American military history at sea barely existed in public memory. No major memorial, no place in the popular narrative of World War II. Just a classified file and a small number of survivors who kept the story alive at reunions no one else attended. The disaster wasn't even quietly declassified until 1967, nearly a quarter century later. And even then, there was no public announcement, no letter to the families, and no acknowledgement of what those men had actually been through that night. It wasn't until documents were gradually declassified, and survivor accounts and later historical research pieced the story together, that the Rohna disaster got anything close to the recognition of comparable tragedies. It took until May 30th, 1996, 53 years after the attack, for the survivors themselves to finally raise their own memorial at Fort Mitchell National Cemetery in Alabama. Its inscription reads simply, "Remember the Rohna." Today, historians point to the Rohna as one of the most significant forgotten disasters of the war. Not because the loss of life wasn't enormous, but because secrecy, timing, and the chaos of a global war meant it simply never entered the story most of us were taught. It's a reminder that some of the most consequential moments in history were never hidden by accident. They were hidden on purpose. If you want to go deeper into the naval stories that never made it into the history books, subscribe. This channel is going to dig up one of these every week.